Good evening, you're watching The Digital Age, and I'm James Goodale. The Digital Age talks about terrorism because terrorism is part of the digital age, and tonight we are going to talk about terrorism, and we're going to talk about a book that talks about 9/11 and Iraq. This book, as you can see, is called A Pretext for War, 9/11 Iraq and the Abuse of Our Intelligence Agencies. It was written by Jim Bamford, and thank you for stopping by. Jim, it's great to see you again.
My pleasure, Jim. Thank you.
Now, your conclusion, I'm going to read your
sure.
conclusion of this whole book and ask you some questions about it. Here's what you say. Thus, the Bush administration's massive disinformation campaign, abetted by a lazy and timid press, succeeded spectacularly in driving the public to support its long-planned war. So I want to ask you, generally speaking, and we can get to the end and you can respond more particularly if you wish, but we'll deal with it as we go along. Was there really a disinformation plan? Well, I guess you'd say yes, there is. Okay, so what was the disinformation plan?
The administration had been wanting to go to war for years, even before they came together in January of 2001. They'd been wanting this war in Iraq. They'd done everything. They once in 1996, the same group of people that were the architects of the war in Iraq planned it for Israel, and they sent it to Benjamin Netanyahu, the former prime minister of Netanyahu, when he became prime minister, and Netanyahu didn't go along with it. They tried to get the Clinton.
Stop.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's quite a mouthful that you just said there.
Right.
Right. And I don't think I've read that anywhere else. And if anyone were to read your book, they ought to read the book, I would say, in some part because of what you just said, which was there was a plan on the books that had been given effectively to Israel, and it was reactivated. And I want you to explain more about that. But I also want to say that I tried to get someone else to come on the program to counter your view on this, because I think this is a pretty unique statement. So, excuse the interruption, but
Sure.
explain a little bit more about, there already was a plan, 1990 what?
96.
The plan had been there for 1996 and was mothballed, and that's what you're saying, and was brought out, and explain that
Yeah,
some
in
more.
1996, three people, there were more, but the three key people who later became senior officials in the George W. Bush administration. Richard Pearl, who became the chairman of the Defense Policy Board, Douglas Feith, who became the number 3 person in the Pentagon, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and David Wimser, who ran a little intelligence unit in the Pentagon and then became Vice President Cheney's Middle East advisor. They were working for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. They actually signed on as consultants to Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996, which sounds extraordinary as it is, but they did. One of the things they did was create a foreign policy forum with regard to what they should do in the Middle East. And one of their key suggestions was to overthrow Saddam Hussein and replace him with a leader who was friendly to both Israel and the United States. The person they had in mind was Ahmed Chalabi, who later became fairly famous in the U.S. in the U.S. attack.
1996.
But this is 1996.
They had a plan, okay, the plan to put Chalabi in power.
It was called a clean break. I mean, the plan is still on. It was for a think tank in Israel that they were doing this for on behalf of Benjamin Netanyahu. And
they were paid by a think tank in Israel?
Yeah, it was a think tank. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's on their website. Somebody does a Google search of a clean break and they'll find it. It's well known. Nobody's ever denied it. It's out there. Richard Pearl himself personally delivered the plan to Benjamin Netanyahu by hand. Anyway, Netanyahu decided not to go along with the plan. It was basically shelved. And
why didn't Netanyahu want to go?
Well, I think he had more sense than the Bush administration.
Well, they had to, what, this plan they had to was when they're going to invade Iraq, invade anybody else?
Yeah, invade Syria? And Lebanon.
Yes, well, that's a little different than just invading Iraq. But Netanyahu said, "You're nuts, these guys." And when they were out in the private sector, now they come back in.
That's
and
right.
your theory is that they had the plan already. They crossed off Syria and they crossed off Iran.
Well,
maybe they should have crossed off Iraq,
and
they should have crossed off Iraq and gone after Iran. But anyway,
well, I wouldn't say they crossed it off yet. They still may be doing
this. You still think they're going to do it?
Read the news lately, yeah. So the plan was to go in there, overthrow Saddam Hussein, put in a leader that was friendly to Israel, friendly to the United States, make the neighborhood around Israel very much happier place. And anyway, the plan didn't get put into effect, so these people ended up becoming senior officials in the Bush administration.
But what proof do you have that they dusted off the plan?
Well,
I mean, why didn't they think of it all over again? Or
well, what's the difference? The plan, it was the point I'm trying to make is the plan had been thought about before. This wasn't exactly original idea.
Right. Well,
they had thought about it before, and it's the same plan.
But why do you think they're the drive?
They wanted to put Ahmed Chalabi in there.
Okay, but you know, you got Rumsfeld, you just said earlier, on 9/11, writes down Iraq. Okay.
Right.
So if he's writing down Iraq, why do you think that this particular gang of 3 is responsible for being the driving force? And even I think the president talked about Iraq the very first day. He passed Richard Clark, and said Iraq. So if the two of them are thinking about it, why are you blaming these guys so much?
Well, I'm blaming the whole Bush administration, but I'm specifically focusing on the fact that these 3, who are the 3 of the key architects of the war in Iraq, these are the people who drew up the plans.
But why? What do you mean the key architect?
Well,
I mean, if Bush and Rumsfeld said, "Go to it, Iraq,"
right?
I mean, why wouldn't they? They're
well,
not the architects.
They all
Rumsfeld and Bush.
They're all thinking on the. They're all working from the same page. I mean, Bush, Rumsfeld, Feith, Womser, Pearl. They're all.
Okay, who are these? Who are these guys?
I think there were different motivations. Yeah. I think the neoconservatives, which were basically the Pearl, Feith, Womser, and a number of other people over there, had their own ideological reasons for wanting to do this, which, you know, they drew up, as I said, in 1996. Same plan.
Now, these guys all had a...
But then George Bush, I think, had a different agenda. And he was never really an ideologue in terms of the neoconservatives, but he did have his own grudge against Iraq, a very serious grudge for a very good reason.
Which
and
was?
That's that the Justice Department came out with a report, and again, this report's on the Justice Department website, that did an investigation of Saddam Hussein and his attempt, according to the Justice Department, to assassinate George Bush Sr. Right. But if you read the report, it wasn't just George Bush Sr. It was George W. Bush's entire family. It was his father, his mother, his wife, his 2 brothers, and his 2 brothers' wives.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Because they were all traveling together.
Oh,
they all would have been
together
on the stage when the bomb was going to go off.
They're going to kill the whole family.
So the whole family would have been
killed. Oh, the family. And
so
W? No, W doesn't travel.
W is a...
no, he didn't travel and he sent his wife.
W, I think, is xenophobic when it comes to travel. He never... he stayed back to work on his baseball team.
So it's his whole family.
So his whole family, and Bush has been quoted a number of times saying, you know, that son of a bitch tried to kill my father or whatever. So, you know, he had his own agenda. There was a conservative agenda that was they should have taken care of Saddam Hussein
so these guys are the activists within this common framework. Now, since you've written the book, there have been some interesting events concerning some of them. Richard Pearl, who's not in the administration, but he's on, what do we call it, the National...
Defense Policy Board.
And that's a board that advises the Secretary of Defense.
That's right, it's a very powerful board.
And it's a very powerful board, and Henry Kissinger is on it, and I don't know, it's a lot of big names.
Yeah,
it's a big deal.
Over a dozen people on it.
And he was the chairman of that board. But he's no longer. He's a member. But since that,
I think he got put back on as chairman again. I'm not sure.
Oh, you think he's chairman again?
Maybe not. But
anyway, since that, since you've written his book, The company on which he served as a director, which would be Lord Black's newspaper company, has been written, which blames him for, it may not be true, but blames him for being part of a plan to take money out of the company inappropriately and not paying attention, so forth and so on. And the report says, as I read in the papers, that he should be sued for what he did, which is unusual. Do you think that this, while it's not relevant, nonetheless, the way the world works, is going to discount his influence in the future, Pearl's influence? Well,
Pearl has always been sort of on the edge there, and this is one more indication of why he should never have been in the job that he holds. He had to resign from the Defense Policy Board for another allegation, you know, there's a lot of problems that I think that he's had, and he should work out those problems, and I think divorce himself from the U.S. government.
But will that have will it discount the influence of this part of the Republican Party?
I don't think it's. I don't think enough people have paid enough attention to it, and he's
so it won't,
as a member of the Defense Policy Board. Yeah. He's basically an unpaid advisor. He's not an employee of the U.S. government.
Let me ask you another question. You connect in your book quite clearly a desire in the administration to protect the security of Israel, to be pro-Israel. And this group has this very much in mind because, as you've indicated, they were engaged to come up with a plan that protected the security of Israel.
Right.
That's the plan you told us about that was put together earlier. I don't understand this, but recently, since your book came out, there's an allegation that someone in the Defense Department has been spying for Israel. Is that connected in any way to this group?
Well, certainly it's connected to the group. The person who was, this person by the name of Franklin, who the allegation was made against, works for Doug Feith. He's a senior official in Feith's office. He's a Army colonel in the Air Force, Air Force colonel in the Reserve, and he's a senior former DIA official. So yeah, he works there for Doug Feith. And
he works for Feith.
He works for Feith, and he worked in the Special Plans Office, the one that was coming up with the phony information about.
And is he the one that's talking to the CIA? I haven't followed the story that carefully.
Yeah, what happened was that about 2 years ago, the FBI began an investigation looking into the connections between, or looking into whether AIPAC, the Israeli American Public Affairs Committee, the Israeli lobby, pro-Israeli lobby, whether that was serving as a conduit for secrets from the U.S. government officials to the state of Israel. And they used photographic surveillance, wiretaps. It was a very serious investigation they've been looking into, the connections between AIPAC and Israel, basically undermining the United States government. And in the middle of this investigation, they found that this person by the name of Franklin had allegedly passed on a very secret document from the White House involving Iran to AIPAC, which then basically laundered it and passed it on to the Israeli government.
And do you think that'll be connected up to Feith?
Well, Feith is the guy running the office. It's
like the rest of the buck stops.
And Feith is, you know, you know, Feith is the same guy who originally created this plan for Iraq for the Israeli government.
All right, so now
Feith's law firm represents people. Before he joined the Pentagon, he represented the settlers in Israel. I mean, he's so connected to Israel. It's incredible.
Okay, so we have this plan, which one could say was dusted off. We have a lot of reasons why the plan is effective, but then you say that this group, and this is a big part of your book, what we're talking about now, this group served as a propaganda agent or organ for the whole United States government, effectively. I think I'm correct in saying that, and put out disinformation. Did they really? How do you prove Tell me about that. It seems,
Yeah.
seems unbelievable that 4 guys could be doing all of this.
Well, it seems unbelievable that
it's 3.
Well, it's not just 3 people. I mean, you've got to look at in a broader perspective.
Okay.
There's other people that are. These are the 3 key people that I mentioned that were involved in this clean break report in 1996. But there's other people that are certainly involved in the deceptions that went on. I mean, the key person was Ahmed Chalabi. There's no question that he's tied
into this group.
Yeah, he was brought into this group 10 years ago or more, 15 years ago.
What do you mean brought into this group? Does it mean he wasn't brought into the National Defense?
He became part of this little crowd, this little neoconservative group over 10 years ago. Paul Wolfowitz, who's now the #2 person in the Pentagon, and Richard Pearl brought him into the little neoconservative group. And he's been a neoconservative. He's basically been what the neoconservatives have wanted to put into Iraq to take the place of Saddam Hussein for years.
Oh, I get it. So
this is what Ahmed Chalabi has wanted, to become president of Iraq.
Right. Well, you know.
How's he going to become president of Iraq? He's got to get the United States to go to war and overthrow Saddam Hussein, and that's what the neoconservatives have wanted.
You know. We know that a lot of the bad intelligence that came out about Iraq was generated through Chalabi-type friends and agents. And I mean, it's not...
fraudsters.
Right.
Yeah.
And in fact, he gave an interview to the Daily Mail in London in which he said, well, maybe some of the intelligence wasn't correct, but it was for a good cause. So there isn't any doubt that the Chalabi put out disinformation. But are you telling me now that there's a connection between the disinformation that Chalabi put out and the thinking of this group? Are you saying effectively this group is responsible for Chalabi's disinformation?
Well,
or did they put out their own disinformation?
No, Chalabi is a creation of this group. This group brought Chalabi to the position where he is. Right after September 11th, Richard Pearl's Defense Policy Board had this big meeting. You know who was at that meeting? Ahmed Chalabi.
And Henry Kissinger.
And Henry Kissinger releases
the whole board was there.
Yeah, at least Henry Kissinger, you know, there's a reason for him to be there as a former
But what was Chalabi doing? Oh, I see what you're saying.
So what
is Chalabi doing at a meeting when he's not even a member of the policy?
Well, of course he's not. He's an Iraqi.
I see what you're saying.
The whole idea was for years and years and years and years to overthrow Iraq, get rid of Saddam Hussein, put their friend Ahmed Chalabi in office. This is not an original idea on my part. This is well known by now.
But all the reviews about your book say it's a great book because you connect the dots.
Yeah.
So I'm just asking you to connect a few dots. I want to ask you about this famous picture, intelligence picture, curveball they call it.
Curveball, right?
Curveball.
You know, I think in the history of intelligence, it's the most accurate code name that's ever been assigned to a person.
His ball really broke.
That's right.
No straight shots from this guy.
Well,
who was Curveball?
Curveball was a source that he was actually somebody who defected to, I think it was Germany, and he had some information about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And he was passing this information on to the United States, and it was all bogus information. The problem was the United States was never allowed to actually interview this person, and they were going on, they were using this information as being valid. And
well, weren't these the trucks that
it was
that Powell talked about when he made his presentation, and he said the trucks were biological labs and
mobile biological labs.
And that was based on what Curveball told. Who did he tell Chalabi? What did Curveball do?
Yeah, well, actually, Powell, when he went into the United Nations Security Council to give his brief, he had 4 sources backing up his allegations about these weapons of mass biological mobile labs.
Right.
One of them was Curveball. Then he had 3 others. All 3
hardball and softball and
and no ball at all.
No ball.
So all three of them fell away, and finally Curveball fell away. They were all proved to be fabricators.
So the mobile, everyone agrees now the mobile labs did not have any biological agents.
I don't know if everybody agrees, but every sensible person at this point agrees that those...
And that's but go back where we were.
It was originally Shalaby.
That's Shalaby's fault?
It was Shalaby. It was the person Shalaby came up with that gave that information originally.
Shalaby's friend is Curveball.
And Curveball worked for the... Curveball was related to somebody who worked at the Shalaby's organization.
Well, now can we blame? We got Shalaby. We got a friend of Shalaby who comes up with Curveball.
Right.
Curveball tells the information in the biological labs to someone who, and it gets into the CIA report. I mean, that's why it's so important. And it gets into Powell's report.
It was a key piece of Powell's.
But now, do we blame this group that we've been talking about, headed by Feith, which has associated with it Wormser and Pearl?
Exactly.
Do we blame them for? But do we blame them for Curveball?
You have to blame him for Curveball. You know, they came up with Ahmed Chalabi. Chalabi came up with Curveball. All these people these are like the Keystone Cops of the U.S. government. Nobody knew what anybody was doing. They were all coming up with phony defectors. The CIA, to its credit, in 1996, threw up his hands and said, "We want nothing more to do with Ahmed Chalabi." The State Department did the same thing. We think the guy is a phony. We can't trust him. He's already been charged in, or found. I think he's been, well, at least charged. I think he was found guilty in Jordan of bank fraud in absentia. Right. And so, you know, they couldn't trust this guy. The CIA gave up with him in 1996. They said, "We will not have anything more to do with him." The State Department said, in 1996, "We won't have anything more to do with him." But the Pentagon, these guys, these little neoconservatives in the Pentagon, kept pushing it and pushing it.
But do you think they knew? Do you think they knew that the Curveballs of the world?
I don't think they.
Do you think they knew the Curveballs were making it up?
I don't think they cared. I think they wanted this war so bad, they didn't care. Everybody was warning them. The CIA was warning them. The State Department constantly warned them. Even the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Well, someone should have caught Curveball. Now, Curveball's stuff ended up in a CIA report, and then Powell uses what's in the CIA report to go to the UN. So what happened? Why didn't the CIA say, "I know a Curveball when I see one"?
The CIA did. The CIA.
But they put in the report.
That was what I'm saying when we're talking about the abuse of the intelligence community. This stuff was being shoved down the CIA's throat because the CIA wanted to be team players, and they ended up going along with a lot of this stuff when they shouldn't have. They should have been fighting it. What should have happened? So at some point, the thing that should have happened, if the system was working right, was George Tenet should have gotten up at some point prior to Powell's talk at the United Nations and said, "Look, I've argued against using Chalabi because we can't trust him. I've argued against the fact that there's this stuff from Niger, which you still put in the president's speech. Look, you're not listening to the information we're coming up with. I have no credibility. I'm quitting. I'm leaving. That's the only thing I can do." And then he could have gone out and went on Larry King or some other show and said, or your show or whatever, and said,
"My show." He comes from Queens.
Exactly.
He's a Greek parents in Queens. I think he should probably be in this show.
Exactly.
This show's big in Queens.
I think he grew up a few blocks from here. So
probably right next to the studio.
So and said, "Look, the CIA. We were trying to tell them that this stuff is unreliable. They wouldn't listen to us. I had to resign because they were abusing our, it's the taxpayers that pay for the CIA. It's not a private little organization. We pay for the CIA to be trustworthy." And
but why he goes into the White House as a slam dunk?
That's right.
When there's curveballs out there that are everyone's whiffing in the ball.
But I interviewed the people at the State Department, and the people very, very close to Powell told me that he told the same thing to Powell. It was a slam dunk.
It's a slam dunk? After he knows that curveballs throwing the curveballs, he says a slam dunk?
That's what I was saying. George Tenet, he was fighting for the agency up to a point around October of 2000. 2. And then he sort of threw up his hands and said, I'm joining the team. I'm not going to fight anymore. I'm going to join the team, because he looked like he was being ostracized, I think, at one point. Again, the Pentagon set up its own little intelligence unit to bypass the CIA.
Well, that's right.
And
this unit was set up because they didn't like what's coming. Oh, so maybe he didn't like being bypassed by the Feith unit, so his reaction to that was to join the team and let all the curveball stuff go in the report. You know, the report that we're talking about, I got the microphone, I'm sorry to think of it. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh,
It's word of speech. I interrupted you, that's why.
That's okay.
The report, which we'll be talking with Tom Powers about, or have been talking with Tom Powers about, actually, is a 100-page long report we're talking about where the curveball stuff is in it. Do you think Tenet read it?
This is called the NIE, the National Intelligence Estimate.
Do you think Tenet read it?
You know, they've never said whether he read it or not, but if he didn't read the President's State of the Union address, which is probably the most important thing from the U.S. government, period. I mean, it's when the President tells the country why it's about to go to war based on intelligence. If he didn't read that, I doubt if he took the time to read the much longer National Intelligence Estimate.
If I can just leaven your comments about the President and note for the record that Senator Kerry didn't read it either. So
I know.
Do you think anyone read the damn thing?
That's a big question. And now, the way it was written also, if you did read it, there were some caveats about, like the State Department had questions about certain things, but they were put more like back notes or footnotes, so they weren't really emphasized in there.
Okay, so it's an interesting theory that this small group started the snowball rolling.
That's right.
And it just picked up more and more snow. Started the curveball. Curveball's rolling.
That's right.
How does a curveball? Well, anyway. And Shalaby picked it up, and then the CIA picked it up, and pretty soon it becomes fact, and Powell is to blame for it, and it all starts way back in 1990.
96 at least. Yeah.
So we've come to the end. I want to ask you, was there a disinformation plan, and did the Bush administration spread the disinformation intentionally?
There certainly was a disinformation plan. All this stuff that came out about connections with Al-Qaeda, uranium in Niger, weapons of mass destruction, came from phony people who were giving phony information. I think some of the original people gave it.
Do you think it was intentional?
I think part of it was intentional, part of it was carelessness. So if you're driving a car drunk and you have an accident, anyway. you're still to blame. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming by, Jim Bamford. And thank you for coming by. Come back next week and learn more about the digital age. For the digital age, I am James Goodale. Good night.